Welcome to the Life Self-Mastery Podcast, where we bring in entrepreneurs who have created online businesses and improved their lifestyles. Here's your host, Rohit Malhotra.
Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Life Self-Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Alex Theuma, who's the founder of the SaaS Revolution show, which led to the first SaaS meetups in London, Dublin and Berlin, which also led to SaaStock, which is the biggest B2B SaaS conference in Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia, and Australasia, which is a global community of SaaS founders, executives, founders who help SaaS companies to gain traction, grow, and scale. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, how did you get into event space, and why did you, start off with the podcast?
Yeah. I kind of fell into the event space because I had a long sales career, and towards the end of the career, I was in selling cloud computing software and really getting interested in the B2B SaaS space and devouring a lot of content there. Trying to learn as much about it as I could, and seeing all these exciting new applications and companies form. And this is around sort of 2012. And I sort of decided, because I was very kind of like hyped by what the movement that was happening in SaaS, to start a blog about SaaS, which was SaaScribe. And that kind of quickly became a community-driven blog. Where we had influencers across the web that I've never met, in the US and, India and Australia, and, contribute content to SaaScribe for the, for the benefit of those that are looking to build, and grow and scale SaaS companies. And so I was doing this as like a side hustle, whilst I had my full-time job. And then I kind of decided, look, why don't I do a podcast as well? Like I certainly had this sort of drive about me back then to kind of do things and push myself that were new and push myself outside of my comfort zone. And quickly the blog and the podcast turned into, supplementing that with some local SaaS meetups, because there weren't any, much to my surprise in London and across Europe at the time. So I took it upon myself. Before I knew it, there was a community forming, and we were connecting both online and offline, and there was a big demand there and an ask for the community to put a conference together and put one together in Europe, as there wasn't one at the time. So I did think about it for a little bit, because I was a bit concerned having no real events experience. But the more people I spoke to, the more convinced I became that this would be successful, and this is something that people wanted, and I wanted to kind of take this upon myself and fulfill that kind of entrepreneurial dream, and take the blog and the podcast and the community building into a real business. And so that's what we did. It came up, I came up with the idea of SaaStock in 2015, ran the first conference in 2016 in September. We had 700 SaaS founders and execs and 100 VCs attend the conference in Dublin from 34 different countries. And I was very surprised how global it was from the get-go. And, there were some sort of wow moments for me at the event when I was, in rooms full of entrepreneurs from across the world. And I had just, simply put on the event, and the people who'd come, and they were all together in one space sharing their knowledge. And that was something great, magical to see. So that was kind of really the origins of the SaaStock story.
Right. And when you started the blog and the podcast, were you able to monetize these products?
Yeah, not really. I did try. We actually we got a lot of traction in the early days of the blog, and this was a combination of I would say kind of hustle. In that, I was working very hard to create content and to source content, and then to promote the content. So initially, in its kind of early days, we were putting out like 5 pieces of original content a week, which was a real sort of undertaking. Now, I wasn't writing these 5 pieces of content, but I was sourcing them from people across the web. And most of it was original, some of it was repurposed, and there was a real, in terms of the strategy, we got a lot of boost to traffic from some of the repurposed stuff, that was kind of well known and brought awareness to us. And also, that some of the influencers that we'd selected that were sharing their content also helped. And, we were active in online sort of communities, promoting new content. I was, on social media, all hours of the day, kind of really sharing and distributing the content to really build up an audience of, I think it was around about sort of like 30,000 visitors per month, after the first sort of 3 or 4 months, which was pretty good going from a standstill, with 0 to 30,000 in 4 months. The podcast, again, like it only really had, because it's a real longer game with the podcast. So I think for the first year or two, we were only having about sort of like 200 to 400 sort of downloads per episode.
Right.
And it's quite difficult to monetize that, even though it's very focused and niche. But with the blog, we did try advertising, we did try sponsorship, and we were taking part in RFPs that fell into our inbox and often came to nothing. So we tried advertising, we tried some sponsorship. We saw that wasn't going to be a sustainable business at that level of traffic. And then that kind of looked and sort of led to that kind of third channel of revenue, which was events. And that was the kind of the third tested path, and the one that proved to be true.
Right. And, you ran the first conference 2015. What were the expenses to run the first conference? I believe around 700 people had come for that particular conference.
Yeah, the first conference cost me about 350,000 euros.
Wow.
So it was quite expensive, and I didn't have that money in the bank, right? So it was funded by revenue, and so I did take a bit of a bet that maybe I was naive, or almost certainly I was a bit naive. But I looked at the business model and the barriers to entry for events, and I kind of saw that, okay, I needed a website, I needed some initial speakers, and a venue, the partners then would come, and obviously the revenue streams would come through selling tickets and selling partnerships. And I already had a couple of partnerships or potential partners interested, that if, again, through that kind of that early community building through the blog, the podcast and the meetups, that I built these connections and spoken to them about, look, if I built this conference, would you sponsor it? And they, a lot of people had said yes, that we would. And so I started to get the website ready. I started to, recruit the speakers. And again, because I had been doing SaaScribe, the blog and the podcast, a lot of the speakers that I reached out to kind of already knew me for the efforts. And so they were more like warm sort of reach outs, warm emails when I was reaching out to them. And they kind of believed in and wanted to see what I was doing succeed. So it was helpful that they agreed to speak at the event. And then as soon as I had the venue, agreed, I looked at the venue. We chose the RDS in Dublin, and I was looking in London, but we chose Dublin. It was a bit cheaper, and there's a really nice kind of vibe to Dublin, and good SaaS community there. And I just had to put down 10% of the total cost of the venue to kind of get going and secure that. And I had that money in the bank, and it wasn't an awful lot of money. I think it was just a couple of thousand. And so I put that down, secured the venue. Then I went to the potential partners, and said, I've got a venue, I've got a website. Are you going to sponsor? And they did. The first one was ChartMogul, SaaS company. It was based in Berlin, but now it's a fully remote company. And they became my first gold partner. And that gave me more runway to kind of, continue to fund the business. So really that was sort of helpful. And effectively from that point on, I funded the business through the revenue. And every time that we had sort of bills to pay, I was like, okay, this is looking a little bit shaky. Am I going to be able to kind of make the payment sort of, at the end of the month? Am I going to be able to pay, any of the sort of contractors? But we kind of had product market fit from the get-go. which was lucky in one way, but obviously we went into this having already done a lot of groundwork and customer development, so we knew that there was demand there for it, and had already built a network and some some partnerships sort of before that, and having 11-year sales career as well, it kind of did help as well. So whilst the costs were 350,000, I think we generated pretty much the same amount of revenue. So we just a little bit less actually. So we did actually lose money on the first event, but actually it wasn't so bad that we couldn't continue.
Right, and what are the areas of SaaS industries which you feel are neglected or undervalued in the industry?
Yeah, the areas of SaaS which feel a bit sort of neglected. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, certainly like at our conference, we've been very much kind of focused around sort of content, around sort of go-to-market, around sales, around marketing, and I definitely feel like sort of sales and marketing sort of verticals within SaaS are not neglected. Some areas that have been neglected would probably be more on the technical side. So stuff around or sort of content, on the technical side, on the engineering side, content, around for like CTOs, and also on the finance side, so stuff for VPs of finance and CFOs within SaaS. So there are obviously products for all of those sort of roles. And there's a lot of content, or some content anyway, for those roles. But traditionally, like SaaStock haven't been, that great at covering that for those audiences. But again, it's something that we're cognizant of and looking to change. We have had a CTO tracks before and experimented with that, and more like technical kind of workshops. And we're looking at sort of this year at SaaStock 20 in Dublin, doing more around sort of finance topics for VPs of finance and CFOs within SaaS companies also.
Right, and after you do a conference, is it possible to do a subscription-based model whereby it's not just a one-time income which is coming, but you have any advice on people who are running events and how it can be subscription-based model?
Yeah, we don't have a subscription-based model at the moment. It's something like I would love, and we haven't. We've occasionally kicked around the idea, probably like after a pint, on a pint after work. But it's not something currently in the roadmap, for us. But again, we have heard that at certain events. So I was in Sydney in December for SaaStock Australasia, which happens every December. And speaking to some of the founders and attendees that were there, some of them sort of mentioned that the content and the advice that they had on the day was sort of great, that they would like, some more sort of like ongoing, access to such kind of education, and thought leadership. So, it's something that we haven't really kind of solved at the moment, but in terms of, we do have, a podcast which puts out regular kind of, educational content, but that's for free. That's the SaaS Revolution show, which is, you can subscribe for, on iTunes or Spotify. And there's a lot of like in-depth practical content on that. We put out a lot of our content for free on YouTube as well. So there'll be a lot of video content going out this year on SaaStock's YouTube channel. Again, that's predominantly free. Some of it can be gated, and we put out content on our blog, of which we are going to put in sort of more in-depth content this year. That would be much more kind of educational and much more around sort of thought leadership than we have been doing in the past. But a subscription model, could certainly make sense. But like right now, that's not something that we offer.
Right, and other than the SaaStock conference that you're running in Dublin, you've recently branched out in Latin America, North America, Asia, and Australasia. So do you have a full-time team who's helping you out build these conferences in? And since you're based out of Europe, how do you ensure that the right amount of audience is there in all these conferences?
It's certainly challenging. We went global last year in sort of one big bang, meaning that we went from having one conference in Dublin, in 2018, to having last year 6 conferences in 5 continents. And there was a lot of learnings along the way. So, for instance, SaaStock last year, we held that in Hong Kong, and we have a sort of playbook, processes for launching and marketing and selling an event. And we, to be honest, were again sort of perhaps a little bit, naive in thinking that playbook is a one, or one market sort of fits all. And we found a lot of challenges with Asia. We found that we didn't really have much, a stronger brand in Asia as we did, in Europe and the US. And our data, that we owned was not as big as it was in Europe and the US. So we did have a lot of learnings, and we're quite dynamic, and then started working with some local people who really kind of had the relationships that we didn't have, who understood how to kind of operate in those markets that we didn't understand. So I think, on the I said positive side of it, so whilst there were a lot of challenges with that, let's say, specific event, we're quite dynamic to kind of, act on those changes and not keep trying the same thing over and over again if it's not working. So our team is pretty much centralized, in London, in the UK. We have, a couple of people that are remote, but we're pretty much a centralized office, and we are, marketing and selling into those regions almost exclusively by having, this centralized office. Again, so there's varying degrees of success, but we now have somebody in Asia that is our head of Asia Pac region. That's just one person, and then LATAM, we just run centrally, from London. The same with North America, and we've had more degrees of success there. Some of the reasons being, I think the groundwork that we put into to those regions, obviously better brand awareness, and being first to market in LATAM and first to market in Australia. Certainly helped. And we're first to market in Asia, but that was still a bit more challenging. First to market in Europe, and I think all of those things have been beneficial, like being first to market. So the US, we're not first to market. I think who is first to market there, but still, that's the biggest market, in B2B software, and the biggest market for events. And again, that comes with its advantages as well.
Right. And Alex, I was wondering, what is the best way to build an email list? What are your thoughts on virtual conferences? Is it something which you have in the pipeline whereby people don't have to show up on a conference, but they're doing virtual conferences? Heard it's a great way to build an email list and do thought leadership.
Yeah. I mean, like building an email list it's definitely hard, right? I mean, we're now 5 years into this, and our email list and our data set, I think can always be better. And I think part of the challenge, certainly, that we've had is that we have a newsletter, which started before SaaStock started, right? And we that was the initial way to kind of build up the email list via having the newsletter, by having our own content, by having the podcast and doing the events, the meetups. And then what we found is that we effectively kind of have the same mailing list of people that subscribe to the newsletter as those that we update with regarding the conferences. I mean, we are able to, via our marketing automation platform, segment those lists, depending on if we're marketing into Latin America, we're not going to hit our whole list. But what you'll find is that, or what we found is that there's a lot of, there's like a leaky bucket in events for the email list. So when somebody's bought a ticket, they often unsubscribe from your email list because they're not often keen on, the further updates that they're getting, and the original reasons that they signed up to is to stay up to date, because they want to hear about, when is the best price, what speakers are taking part, when is the agenda going to be released. And they purchase the ticket, and then they don't want to be disturbed anymore by our emails, and they unsubscribe. So we get a large amount of unsubscribes. Right. So as good as we do in terms of acquiring new emails, we find that almost as many unsubscribe during the process of selling tickets. So that is a challenge. But I think ultimately, if we look at where we started and what we do today, the content. So trying to be a value add within the specific sort of vertical industry. Around the content, so putting out regular content, we have some gated stuff, gated content that helps build. We've never done any virtual conferences. The events themselves and doing kind of like smaller events and meetups kind of help build the lists as well. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, but yeah, the leaky bucket makes it challenging at times.
Right. And how can SaaS companies innovate to acquire new customers? Because you run your events like a SaaS company. So any thoughts for founders on how to acquire new customers so that the CAC to LTV ratio is not really high?
Yeah, I guess it really obviously depends on the business, size of the business, the model, etc. I do see a bit of a trend of moving away from paid ads and demand generation, as one thing, because the costs on ad spend are certainly kind of increasing with the competitiveness, especially around AdWords, because if you look at like MarTech, for instance. A few years ago, there was probably, a few hundred MarTech companies. Now there are, maybe it was almost sort of 10,000 or so. And so the competition is higher, and that's kind of producing higher costs in ad spend. I mean, obviously, I would say, depending on your ACV, if you're selling to mid-market and enterprise, events is a very scalable way of winning customers, acquiring customers, and we've seen that. And again, events via conferences, but also like hosting your own dinners and smaller events, or running your own events as a business. I think that is something that we've seen a lot of companies do really well, and they're able to kind of scale that up. So see the real ROI from an event, and then say, okay, well, from that dinner that we hosted, we closed down these deals, therefore we should do more dinners in these areas, and so on. I think generally outbound sales, I've seen again in the last sort of couple of years, has been very strong and proven to really kind of transform a SaaS company's business from I guess growing fairly kind of slowly to really kind of accelerating growth in a very kind of short period of time. And often that the reasons that I've seen the founders explain as to what was the reason as to why they were able to get from, let's say, 1 million in ARR to 20 million in ARR in sort of 3 or 4 years. And often I've seen that outbound sales has been kind of one of the key reasons, and the ability to kind of scale outbound sales, build a playbook, for an outbound sales team, for the SDRs, for the AEs, and so on.
Right. And, are you okay to talk about what the kind of revenue numbers you did across 2019? And do you have plans to run your own fund later on?
Yeah. So revenue numbers for 2019, we will have done about sort of $4 million US dollars.
Well, yeah.
So we're obviously looking to increase that for 2020. In terms of having our own fund, I mean, again, like this is, it's not a high priority right now, but it is something that at every SaaStock conference that when we're speaking to founders and investors, given the kind of the access to data and the deal flow that we have, and the deals that get done at SaaStock. I mean, like every SaaStock conference, the investors are walking away with huge amounts of deal flow, and so many companies get funded at our conference that we're not actually capturing, kind of any of that in terms of monetary value for ourselves, but we just help enable that happen. And so it is a thought, and obviously we've seen that, with other conferences as well that have funds and use the conference as a marketplace or a shop window to attract that sort of deal flow. I think like right now, as we've jumped from one conference to 5 conferences, we're much more, I think, focused on ensuring that we're successful at these, that we have all the processes right, that given that they're our kind of priority and our focus, to deliver on those, and before we kind of move on to looking at potentially some sort of fund or micro fund.
Right, and you also run a startup program where you give a 25,000 prize. Is it for people, for SaaS companies which have not got their product market fit?
Yeah, the startup competition. So we run a startup competition sort of globally at each of the SaaStock conferences, so each of the regions. And the winners of the regional ones get access straight into the semi-finals of the main global conference, which startup competition, which happens in the Dublin event in October. So we get thousands of SaaS startups that apply and take part in that, and we're looking for a specific size of company. Effectively, the winner of that goes through the semi-finals and the finals, and pitches sort of live on stage. They get the title of best SaaS startup of that particular year. So last year, an Icelandic company called Crankwheel won Best SaaS Startup 2019. In 2018, it was a company called Cladara, and they win 25,000 sort of US dollars also as the global prize. And often they're the broader kind of recognition, and we've seen these companies get raise capital on the back of that as well. So the startup competition there, like our program, we try to sort of differ that from some of the others that are at other conferences, in that we try and add a lot more kind of value around beyond just exhibiting and pitching. But there's a lot of mentorship, a lot of education, a lot of workshops that we do with our startups to add value within that program. So we're very happy with it. We saw and we thought that the traditional kind of startup program sort of offerings at other conferences was a little bit broken, and we really wanted to add a lot more value wrapping around our startup program, which we've done.
Right. Alex, I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
Favorite business book? Right now, I'm reading Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, and that's pretty good. So right now, it's my current favorite.
Right, and if you could go back in time when you started working on the event space, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
I would have gotten a mentor in earlier to advise me that I was spending too much money.
Okay. And do you have your favorite online tools, example, Gmail, Slack, Evernote?
A big fan of Zoom, which we're using now. I think that's taken video conferencing and sort of meetings to the next level. Having used other technologies in my previous life as a salesperson, this is it's a tool that's pleasurable to use.
Right. And what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about SaaStock?
Yeah, email alex@SaaStock.com or on Twitter @Alex Theuma. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Use my name as well. So I'm probably most active on Twitter and LinkedIn. But yeah, always, if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me, alex@SaaStock.com.
Right, and any plans to come to India, because there are a lot of SaaS companies which are coming out of India as well?
Yeah, it's definitely a thought every year, and we've got a lot of contacts there, and in Chennai and in Bangalore, right. And so we do see a big SaaS movement there. We do get a lot of people from India come to SaaStock. There were delegations coming, in 2019, and we expect the same. So this year, it's definitely a consideration because there is demand. Again, I think like this year, certainly 2020, we're focusing on the 5 conferences that we have and making sure they all run to the standards that we want them to run. And then beyond that, we may look at like branching out in India. Having said that, we do have SaaStock Local, which is like our sort of like SaaStock sort of branded meetups. And we put on a lot of good content, and we've been running, we had a couple of SaaStock Locals in Chennai and in Bangalore in 2019, and we expect more to be happening in India in 2020.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Alex, for coming onto the show. I really appreciate speaking to you.
Excellent. Great speaking to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Life Self-Mastery podcast, where we teach you how to start and grow your online business. For more information, visit Rohit's blog at www.lifeselfmastery.com.